Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Devolution Recap Series. Couple housekeeping things right off the bat. I'm trying my darndest to go live to locals right now. And it's not letting me. I'm clicking go live to go live to locals right now. I'm clicking go live. Don't know why. Go live. Don't know why, but I'll keep trying that as I go here. Don't know why. Not much I can do. I was going to do a little locals thing, but honestly, this episode we're about to do, part 10, I forgot how long this thing is. It might be my longest article, which is nuts because I have a lot of long articles, but this one, it might be the longest. That's what she said. So we're going to get right into this thing. That's also what she said. But first, I want to kick things off with a word from our sponsor of today's show. And I love that this guy is continuing to sponsor us because I love this book, and it's City Zoo. Our sponsor is City Zoo, an unfair story by Jeff Pettigo. He's Captain Seth Keshel's reclusive map guy. Everybody in this community knows who Seth Keshel is, and you're probably familiar with his maps. That's Jeff Pettigo. City Zoo is an allegorical fable like George Orwell's Animal Farm, but instead of being a fable about the Russian Revolution, it's an allegory about the color revolution now underway in the United States. But City Zoo is less about politics than it is about the unique culture of the U.S. and the way our news media have been monkeying with it. That monkeying word, it's kind of a hint to the book. So City Zoo is why Badlands Media exists in the first place. I mean, technically. City Zoo presents an animalized history of the USA and its unique culture, but when a suspiciously Trumpian elephant called Gus decides to run for animal zookeeper, the news media, made up of shrieking, dung-throwing monkeys, go apeshit. I mean, guys, this book is so perfect, like for how it ties, how it's a metaphor for what we're actually going through. I honestly can't recommend this book enough the more I read it. Lastly, and relevant to Devolution Part 10, City Zoo explicitly calls out China and their participation in the subversion of our culture. The author would like to thank the Devolution series and the recap series here in Badlands community for selling out Amazon's entire inventory of the hardcover. More on the way, so you can be patient, but also the ebook is only $10. So you can buy the ebook, decide to read it later, decide to read it now, whatever. But if enough of us bought the ebook, City Zoo would make it to the top 10 in literary satire, and we can make that happen. Let's show how strong our community is. Prove we are the media now. The book is City Zoo. Go to badlandsmedia.tv/cityzoo. Honestly, can't recommend this book enough. I been reading bits and pieces with my kids because they walk in on me reading it the last couple of days, and they think it's hilarious. So check it out, badlandsmedia.tv/cityzoo. Thank you, Jeff, for sponsoring the show. All right, guys, like I said, this is one of the longest articles I have. It's like 2 hours worth of Patrick reading, and for me to add commentary to that, like I'm definitely going to speed it up. But I'm probably going to limit my commentary as much as possible, and kind of do summaries instead of like stopping as I used to do very often. I guess we'll see. It's been a while since I read this article. Maybe I'll have a lot that comes to mind, but we're going to get right into it. Here we go.
I need to warn you that this is far and away my longest article to date. I feel like there are parts of this article in which I easily could have elaborated further, but for brevity's sake, I did not. I could have broken this article up into 2 or even 3 parts, but I truly felt it was important to make this one article because it all ties together. By the end of this article, I believe you will understand exactly why the situation in Afghanistan is unfolding the way it is, what role Trump has in it, and that we are truly on the precipice of taking back our country. Almost 10 days ago, I was asked a question by Dave Hayes, the praying medic. Dave asks, I would be interested in hearing your thoughts, whenever you have a few moments, on what might be the earliest date at which America and China began the silent war. Here's a summary of my reply. At the latest, I would say it was January 15th, 2020. In Devolution Part 1, I referenced Trump and Chinese economic dealings. They signed the trade deal on January 15th, the day before his first impeachment started. Here is a screenshot from Devolution Part 1. If you look objectively at Trump's handling of China, his policies were pro-American rather than pro-China approach of previous administrations. In August of 2017, he directed the Office of the United States Trade Representative to investigate Chinese economic practices. Their subsequent report attacked many aspects of China's monetary policy. Trump began imposing tariffs on Chinese products, referencing, quote, a trade deficit of $500 billion a year with intellectual property theft of another $300 billion. I'll cover this IP theft in a future post. These tariffs led to a trade war that culminated in the Phase 1 trade deal signing on January 15th of 2020. Why is that date important? Because the very next day, Trump's impeachment trial in the Senate began.
I was about to correct myself. So I was like, I don't know if his impeachment started on January 15th or 16th, but yeah, I was right. January 16th, 2020 is when it started in the Senate.
End quote from Devolution Part 1. Part 10 continues. I think the timing of COVID-19 coming from China at the same time as Trump signed the Phase 1 trade deal is too much of a coincidence.
Guys, I'm going to try speeding this up to 1.5. And so if that's too fast, let me know. Because again, this article is so long and I want to be able to add more commentary to it. I'm going to see if this is crazy. If it is, let me know. I can slow it back down, but let's see how this goes.
I believe COVID-19 was the Chinese Communist Party's response to hurt our economy in retaliation for winning the trade deal, which we certainly did by looking at any objective measure. It must have embarrassed Xi. Dave then pointed out that January 15th, 2020 was the day that the first case of COVID-19 arrived in the United States from Wuhan, according to the CDC. Press release for immediate release Tuesday, January 21st, 2020. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention today confirmed the first case of 2019 novel coronavirus, 2019 nCoV, in the United States in the state of Washington. The patient recently returned from Wuhan, China, where an outbreak of pneumonia caused by this novel coronavirus has been ongoing since December 2019. While originally thought to be spreading from animal to person, there are growing indications that limited person-to-person spread is happening. It's unclear how easily this virus is spreading between people. The patient from Washington with confirmed 2019 nCoV infection returned to the United States from Wuhan on January 15th, 2020. The patient sought care at a medical facility in the state of Washington, where the patient was treated for the illness. Based on the patient's travel history and symptoms, healthcare professionals suspected this new coronavirus. A clinical specimen was collected and sent to CDC overnight, where laboratory testing yesterday confirmed the diagnosis via CDC's real-time reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction test. That's RRT-PCR test.
So it sounds like the chat is okay with this speed. I like Armando's comment. Not too bad. Sounds like a Valley girl in California. So I'm going to keep it at the speed unless it gets a little ridiculous. Sometimes Patrick, as he reads long things, he'll start to read faster. So we'll see how it goes. But I did want to say, now that I have more time, with this article, the reason this article got so long is because this question that Dave Hayes, Praying Medic, presented me kind of put me down this rabbit trail. And if you remember, I was kind of new to a lot of things when I started researching and writing this stuff. I was vaguely paying attention to, and maybe not even vaguely, like I was actively paying attention to the Russiagate stuff. But in terms of context, I knew nothing. I didn't have any history of like researching stuff from prior. And this article, like this dig, it provided me with a lot of answers and context that I didn't have previously. And that's why I included all that stuff in here, because I found like so much of it to be important. And honestly, like there was so much more I could have put in this article now that I remember back to it. And we'll get into a lot of this stuff as we go. But the reason this thing got so long is because there's so much relevant information for the context of why devolution was needed in the first place, dating back to well before Trump. And it was just it all fit.
The piece continues, Devolution Part 10. The number of coincidences that I have come across writing this series has been astounding. Anyway, Dave's question got me thinking about the bigger picture. Trump was making moves to prepare for an election theft long before January 15th, 2020. I can't imagine he knew back in 2018 that in 2 years, COVID-19 would leak from a CCP bioweapons lab and be used as a pretext to steal the 2020 election. This war is bigger than just China. As I said in Devolution Addendum Series Part 1, Trump is fighting a war against the entire political establishment. Remember, the political establishment is the cause of not just America's problems, but problems around the entire world. Many of our government leaders and government institutions have been corrupted nearly beyond repair. They have been selling America out for personal gain for years. They do it because it's extremely lucrative, and they do it because they've gotten away with it for so long. They thought they were invincible. The mainstream media and big tech act as the propaganda arm and spin the narrative necessary for the political establishment to operate while keeping America ignorant. The political establishment then uses the intelligence agencies to do their dirty work. They rig the elections as to never lose their grip on power. The media, big tech, and the intelligence community cover up the rigged elections, then they rinse, wash, and repeat. America's enemies jump at the chance to assist them in their operations. For example, when the CCP has the opportunity to make a shady deal with a corrupt American politician or a member of his or her family, it becomes the best case scenario for the CCP. Having proof of corrupt dealings provides the CCP with the opportunity to control those government officials who are involved. They can use the proof of the dealings as blackmail, and that is an effective tool for getting what you want. It doesn't take long to destroy the greatest nation on earth when its leaders have sold it out. When corruption like this perverts our entire government, who can stop it? The answer to this question is the basis for this article, and really the basis for the entire Devolution series. There is only one remaining group of individuals who stand in the way of the total destruction of America. That group is the United States military. Joint Publication 1 from the Joint Chiefs of Staff Doctrine series tells us the purpose of the United States Armed Forces. 2. Purpose. A. The U.S. Armed Forces fulfill unique and crucial roles, defending the U.S. against all adversaries while serving the nation as a bulwark and the guarantor of its security and independence. The U.S. Armed Forces function within the American system of civil-military relations and serve under the civilian control of the President, the Commander-in-Chief. The U.S. Armed Forces embody the highest values and standards of American society and the profession of arms, end quote.
Well, I'm going to play a little bit longer, never mind.
Defending the U.S. against all adversaries while serving the nation as a bulwark and the guarantor of its security and independence. What if those adversaries are our own leadership? What if our elected officials themselves are risking the security and independence of the United States? The U.S. Armed Forces have the best intelligence capabilities in the world. What would happen if they received intelligence that a sitting president and or his administration did something that by any objective measure put the national security of the United States of America at risk? What if it happened repeatedly? How could they defeat the biggest threat to America if that threat is where their orders are coming from? This is where I believe the true silent war began. Prior to Trump ever announcing his candidacy for president, the military was witnessing the highest levels of our government selling out America for personal gain and putting our national security at risk. So, in order to properly provide context to why devolution had to happen, we need to look back at what got us here. Why did the political establishment fight Trump's presidency so hard, as if their lives depended on it? Why were they so desperate to stop Trump that they overplayed their hands and blatantly stole an election? Where did the silent war begin?
One thing from this that I would maybe change or say differently is when I'm talking about the only group that would, be able to stop this whole thing would be the United States military. I think that's a part of it, but I don't think it's limited to just the military. I think that whatever group is part of the devolution op going on, which we kind of get more details on in part 13, which I'm very excited to get to here in like a week or so. I think it's bigger than just the military. It's a small portion of the military. That's a very important part of it. The justification for implementing something like devolution would be an act of war. So naturally, the military would be involved, but I don't think it's just them.
The Obama years. I have no doubt that the war against the political establishment has been happening since prior to Barack's presidency, but this seemed like the most logical place to start. By the time Donald Trump announced his run for the presidency in June of 2015, the political establishment had already completely corrupted our federal government. Trump built his 2016 campaign on the premise of giving the government back to the American people. From Trump's campaign, quote, "Our movement is about replacing a failed and corrupt," now when I say corrupt, I'm talking about totally corrupt, political establishment with a new government controlled by you, the American people. This is nothing. There is nothing the political establishment will not do. No lie they won't tell to hold their prestige and power at your expense. And that's what's been happening. I'm doing this for the people and for the movement, and we will take back this country for you, and we will make America great again. The corrupt establishment knows that we are a great threat to their criminal enterprise. They know that if we win, their power is gone, and it's returned to you, the people. The dark clouds hanging over our government can be lifted and replaced with a bright future, but it all depends on whether we let the corrupt media decide our future or whether we let the American people decide our future. Back to Patel.
Man, I love that part. The propaganda part. Let me see if we get into it here.
Although the propaganda arm of the political establishment will like.
Okay, it doesn't look like we do. So the him saying in that campaign stuff is, letting the media decide it, or are we going to decide it ourselves? Like, even back then, 2016, early 2017, he was well aware that this was fifth generation warfare, narrative warfare. And he was already like telling us that. And I kind of missed it. That glossed over me because I didn't get into the narrative stuff, the fifth generation warfare, the psyops, until the part 22 dig on the fourth psyop group. And I didn't realize like really how important it was till that article, seeing all the moves that Trump made. And so him talking about that there was very notable.
I'd like you to think otherwise. Barack Obama was a terrible president, and his presidency was filled with scandals. This Wikipedia page, linked in the article, has a list of 68, quote, Obama administration controversies. I won't be mentioning every controversy, but I will focus on the ones that I believe are most relevant to the devolution we are currently seeing play out. The primary scandals are Uranium One deal, Operation Fast and Furious, the Clinton email scandal, the Iran nuclear deal, Benghazi, and Spygate. Each one of these scandals is an example of our own government led by President Obama directly putting the national security of the United States at risk. I could easily write an article dedicated to each of these individually. How long this article is going to end up being, I will not be able to do that. The scandal I will deep dive into is Benghazi. You'll see why shortly. I don't want the fact that I won't be providing in-depth analysis of the other scandals
I'll slow down a little bit for this.
to take away from their overall importance. They all play a part in the bigger picture. I urge you to do your own research if you feel something is lacking. Disclaimer. I didn't start following politics until 2018. I had surface level understanding of these scandals, but I wasn't paying attention as they were unfolding. Writing this article opened my eyes to how corrupt Washington had become. It's truly breathtaking. The Uranium One deal is the tip.
This Uranium One deal is still like something that I should dig into this more. There's so much more to this than I think I realize and many people realize. How corrupt and who was involved in this. It's sketchy as hell.
Typical pay for play scenario. This October 2017 National Review article provides a solid breakdown. There's plenty more to the full story, so read the article someday when you have the chance. Quote from National Review 2017. Let's put the Uranium One scandal in perspective. The cool $500,000 the Putin regime funneled to Bill Clinton was 5 times the amount it spent on those Facebook ads, the ones the media Democrat complex ludicrously suggests swung the 2016 presidential election to Donald Trump. The Facebook ad buy, which started in June 2015, before Donald Trump entered the race, was more left-wing agitprop, ads pushing hysteria on racism, immigration, guns, etc., than electioneering. The Clintons' own longtime political strategist, Mark Penn, estimates that just $6,500 went to actual electioneering. You read that right. $6,500. By contrast, the staggering $500,000 payday from a Kremlin-tied Russian bank for a single speech was part of a multi-million-dollar influence peddling scheme to enrich the former president and his wife, then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. At the time, Russia was plotting, successfully, to secure U.S. government approval for its acquisition of Uranium One, and with it, tens of billions of dollars in U.S. uranium reserves. Here's the kicker. The Uranium One scandal is not only or even principally a Clinton scandal. It is an Obama administration scandal. The Clintons were just doing what the Clintons do, cashing in on their public service. The Obama administration, with Secretary Clinton at the forefront, but hardly alone, was knowingly compromising American national security interests. The administration greenlighted the transfer of control over 1/5 of American uranium mining capacity to Russia, a hostile regime, and specifically to Russia's state-controlled nuclear energy conglomerate, Rosatom. Worse, at the time the administration approved the transfer, it knew that Rosatom's American subsidiary was engaged in a lucrative racketeering enterprise that had already committed felony extortion, fraud, and money laundering offenses. The Obama administration also...
I don't think we talk enough about that Russian collusion. Like, how were they able to get that deal? Like, that is far worse than anything Trump ever did. But they literally sold our uranium to Russia's military.
Also knew that congressional Republicans were trying to stop the transfer. Consequently, the Justice Department concealed what it knew. DOJ allowed the racketeering enterprise to continue compromising the American uranium industry rather than commencing a prosecution that would have scotched the transfer. Prosecutors waited 4 years before quietly pleading the case out for a song in violation of Justice Department charging guidelines. Meanwhile, The administration stonewalled Congress, reportedly threatening an informant who wanted to go public. There is no doubt that this extraordinarily gainful ingratiation took place. I outlined some of it a year ago in suggesting that the Justice Department should be investigating the Clinton Foundation and its exploitation of Hillary Clinton's influence as Secretary of State as a potential racketeering case. In 2005, former President Clinton helped his Canadian billionaire friend and benefactor Frank Giustra obtain coveted uranium mining rights from Kazakhstan's dictator. The Kazakh deal enabled Giustra's company, Eurasia Energy, to merge into Uranium One, a South African company, a $3.5 billion windfall. Giustra and his partners thereafter contributed tens of millions of dollars to the Clinton Foundation. Besides the valuable Kazakh reserves, Uranium One also controlled about a fifth of the uranium stock in the United States. Alas, Putin, the neighborhood bully, also wanted the Kazakh uranium. He leaned on Kazakhstan's dictator, who promptly arrested the official responsible for selling the uranium mining rights to Giustra's company. This put Uranium One's stake in jeopardy of being seized by the Kazakh government. As Uranium One's stock plunged, its panicked executives turned to the State Department, where their friend Hillary Clinton was now in charge. State sprung into action, convening emergency meetings with the Kazakh regime. A few days later, it was announced that the crisis was resolved. Translation: the shakedown was complete. Russia's energy giant Rosatom would purchase 17% of Uranium One, and the Kazakh threat would disappear, and with it, the threat to the value of the Clinton donors' holdings. For Putin, though, that was just a start. He didn't want a minority stake in Uranium One. He wanted control of the uranium. For that, Rosatom would need a controlling interest in Uranium One. That would be a tall order, not because of the Kazakh mining rights, but because acquisition of Uranium One's American reserves required U.S. government approval. Uranium is foundational to nuclear power and thus to American national security. As the New York Times explained in a report on the disturbing interplay between the Clinton Foundation and the transfer of American uranium assets to Russia, the United States gets a fifth of its electrical power from nuclear energy, but only produces a fifth of the uranium it needs. Consequently, a foreign entity would not be able to acquire rights to American uranium without the approval of the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. CFIUS, C-F-I-U-S, Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, is composed of the leaders of 14 U.S. government agencies involved in national security and commerce. In 2010, these included not only Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who had cultivated a reputation as a hawk opposed to such foreign purchases, but Attorney General Eric Holder, whose Justice Department and its lead agency, the FBI, were conducting the investigation of Rosatom's ongoing U.S. racketeering, extortion, and money laundering scheme. In March 2010, to push the Obama reset agenda, Secretary Clinton traveled to Russia, where she met with Putin and Dmitry Medvedev, who was then keeping the president's chair warm for Putin. Soon after, it emerged that Renaissance Capital, a regime-tied Russian bank, had offered Bill Clinton $500,000 to make a single speech, far more than the former president's usual haul and what would become one of his biggest paydays ever. Renaissance was an aggressive promoter of Rosatom. The Clinton speech took place in Moscow in June. The exorbitant speech fee, it is worth noting, is a pittance compared to the $145 million Newsweek reports was donated to the Clinton Foundation by sources linked to the Uranium One deal. The month before the speech, the Hill reports, Bill Clinton told his wife's State Department that he wanted to meet while in Russia with Arkady Dvorkovich, who, in addition to being a top Medvedev aide, was also a key Rosatom board member. It is not known whether the State Department gave clearance for the meeting. The question appears to have become moot since the former U.S. president met directly with Putin and Medvedev. You will be comforted, I'm sure, to learn that aides to the Clintons, those pillars of integrity, assure us that the topics of Rosatom and Uranium One never came up. End quote.
That's insane. I almost forgot about that. Like how disgusting and corrupt that whole situation was. Man, we don't talk about that enough.
Patel continues.
And if you remember back to yesterday before the show, the Power Hour, was going through old Trump debate stuff. When he was debating Clinton, he brought up Uranium One. So maybe we haven't seen the end of this.
If you think that is the only Clinton scandal, Lewinsky, nothing yet.
Oh, that was hilarious. That was a good one. Good job, John.
Give my poor attempt at a humorous Monica Lewinsky reference, but please keep the above scandal in mind. This type of pay-for-play scheme is common for our corrupt political establishment. There is no doubt that the Uranium One deal put the national security of the United States at risk. Many details of the scandal have come to light. Our military is obviously aware of those details, and with their intelligence capabilities, they likely know more than we do regarding the details that haven't yet come to light. The real question is, how would white hats in the military feel about seeing this unfold? Would they be okay with this?
You know, that's something I wish I could get more details on, like how much of our actual national security issues like this that our Congress does is our military monitoring. You know what I mean? Like, are they actually aware of this stuff going on and how it might affect national security? I mean, they must be, but like, who pays attention to that? Who's the group that's monitoring this stuff?
Operation Fast and Furious. Although the following is from CNN, I believe it contains a good basic overview of the scandal. Quote from CNN. Here's a look at Operation Fast and Furious. From 2009 to 2011, the Phoenix Field Division of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, ATF, along with other partners, allowed illegal gun sales in order to track the sellers and purchasers who were believed to be connected to Mexican drug cartels. During the Fast and Furious investigation, nearly 2,000 firearms were illegally purchased for $1.5 million, according to a DOJ Inspector General report. Hundreds of guns were later recovered in the United States and Mexico. In 2010, two of the weapons linked to Fast and Furious turned up near the scene of the murder of Border Patrol agent Brian Terry in the Arizona desert. Whistleblowing led to investigations by the Senate Judiciary Committee and the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. During the House investigation, Attorney General Eric Holder was cited for contempt. Fast and Furious was one of the operations under Project Gunrunner, part of the Department of Justice's broader National Southwest Border Counter-Narcotics strategy. Operation Fast and Furious was not the ATF's first gun-walking investigation, which allowed illegally purchased firearms to, quote-unquote, walk out of gun shops. It was preceded by Operation Wide Receiver, which began in 2006. And
who comes up with these names? I want that job.
Quote. So, our own government was selling firearms to Mexican drug cartels, and those guns ended up being connected to all sorts of crimes. Does that not put America's security at risk? Do you think the white hats in the military would be okay with this going on? The Clinton email scandal. From the BBC, quote, Hillary Clinton has been cleared for a second time by the FBI over her use of a...
This is another topic that Trump brought up in their 2016 debates, the email scandal, which I also don't think we've heard the end of.
Private email server while Secretary of State. What's it all about? In July, an FBI investigation concluded no reasonable prosecutor would bring a criminal case against Mrs. Clinton, but that she and her aides were extremely careless in their handling of classified information. Then the FBI surprised everyone 11 days before the election by announcing it was examining newly discovered emails sent or received by Hillary Clinton. 2 days before voting booths opened across the nation, FBI Director James Comey announced he was standing by his original assessment that Mrs. Clinton should not face criminal charges. So, how did we get here? Shortly before she was sworn in as Secretary of State in 2009, Hillary Clinton set up an email server at her home in Chappaqua, New York. She then relied on this server, home to the email address hdr22@clintonemail.com, for all her electronic correspondence, both work-related and personal, during her 4 years in office. She also reportedly set up email addresses on the server for her longtime aide, Huma Abedin.
I wonder why she used 22 in her email. If that was like the 22nd account she was on, like I use 22 in some of my emails because it's like my favorite number. It was my baseball number, but I'm curious why she chose 22.
Abedin and State Department Chief of Staff Cheryl Mills. She did not use...
And oh yeah, Abedin is the one that's married to Alex Soros now. Forgot about that.
Or even activate a state.gov email account, which would have been hosted on servers owned and managed by the U.S. government. Mrs. Clinton's email system became a national story the first week of March 2015, when the New York Times ran a front-page article on the subject. The article said that the system may have violated federal requirements and was alarming to current and former government archive officials. Skeptics have countered that the real reason Mrs. Clinton established her own email system was because it gave her total control over her correspondence. With her email setup, she became the sole arbiter of what should and shouldn't be provided to the government, made public via Freedom of Information requests, or turned over to interested parties such as the Congressional Committee investigating the 2012 attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi. According to the State Department Inspector General report, in 2010, Mrs. Clinton told her deputy chief of staff that one of her concerns with email is that she did not want any risk of the personal being accessible. An FBI investigation found that Mrs. Clinton used numerous personal devices while in office and relied on several email servers. Clinton staffers told the FBI that they destroyed some of the replaced devices with a hammer, while they could not account for others. According to Mrs. Clinton, she sent or received 62,320 emails during her time as Secretary of State. She or her lawyers have determined about half of those, 30,490, roughly 55,000 pages, were official and have been turned over to the State Department. Mrs. Clinton said the other emails are private, relating to topics like her daughter's wedding, her mother's funeral, and yoga routines. At Hillary Clinton's request,
I don't know why, but I just can't picture Hillary Clinton being a yoga person.
the State Department released the first set of emails sent on her private account in May 2015, with many relating to the 2012 attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi. In early August 2015, she signed an affidavit swearing she had turned over all copies of government records from her time in office. The FBI found several thousand work-related emails that were not turned over to the State Department, although it concluded that the emails were deleted prior to 2014 and were not intentionally removed in an effort to conceal them. About 3,000 emails are expected to be released in the run-up to Election Day, but many more will not be processed until after 8 November. End quote. Patel continues. In 2015, Peter Schweitzer published the book Clinton Cash, The Untold Story of How and Why Foreign Governments and Businesses Helped Make Bill and Hillary Rich. Quote, Clinton Cash is an investigation of the foreign benefactors of Bill and Hillary Clinton and the Clinton Foundation. It investigates alleged connections between Clinton Foundation donors and Hillary Clinton's work at the State Department. The book argues that the Clinton family accepted lavish donations and speaking fees from foreign donors at times when the State Department was considering whether to award large contracts to groups and people affiliated with those donors. One of those donors was Mohammed Hussein Alamoudi, an Ethiopian and Saudi Arabian billionaire businessman. The book has 11 chapters. Some chapters focus on particular transactions or deals, such as the creation of Eurasia Energy and Uranium One in Kazakhstan, and the connection shareholders had and have to the Clintons. Other chapters focus on a broader set of relationships, particularly with regard to Bill Clinton's paid speeches during the years Hillary Clinton served as Secretary of State, and whether those paying for his speeches had significant business before the State Department. Schweitzer dubs the Clintons' blend of government service and private remuneration the Clinton blur. Hillary Clinton is basically Joe Biden in a pantsuit with a mean streak for suiciding anyone who might have dirt on her. Both are products of the corrupt political establishment they are beholden to, and both sold out their country for personal gain. The Iran nuclear deal.
This is a good one. This is a very relevant one to Trump's presidency and Biden, what he tried to do, but devolution prevented.
The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, commonly referred to as the Iran nuclear deal, is certainly one of the more complex scandals. There appears to be much more than meets the eye. The Wall Street Journal summarized it best, quote, the Obama administration followed up a plane load of $400 million in cash sent to Iran in January with 2 more such shipments in the next 19 days, totaling another $1.3 billion, according to congressional officials briefed by the U.S. State, Treasury, and Justice Departments. The cash payments, made in Swiss francs, euros, and other currencies, settled a decades-old dispute over a failed arms deal dating back to 1979. U.S. officials have acknowledged the payment of the first $400 million coincided with Iran's release of American prisoners and was used as leverage to ensure they were flown out of Tehran's Mehrabad on the morning of January 17th. End quote. This from The Hill. Quote, these were facts that former President Obama knew when he deliberately chose a policy of appeasement and cash payoffs instead of strength and accountability as the way to deal with Iran. President Trump spelled this out in no uncertain terms on Wednesday when he addressed the nation while seeking to dial down the imminent threat Iran may pose to our nation, the Middle East, and the world. Said the president, in part, quote, Iran's hostilities substantially increased after the foolish Iran nuclear deal was signed in 2013, and they were given $150 billion, not to mention $1.8 billion in cash. Then Iran went on a terror spree, funded by the money from the deal, and created hell in Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Afghanistan, and Iraq. The missiles fired last night at us and our allies were paid for, with the funds made available by the last administration. End quote. As we have seen and heard, some, especially Democrats, their allies in the media, and Obama supporters, chose to challenge or quibble with Trump's statement. That said, I spoke with a former senior intelligence official who said that much of the $1.8 billion cash payment from the Obama administration was used explicitly to fund terrorism as an additional screw you from the leaders of Iran, including Soleimani, to the United States. The rest of the money, my source believes, ended up in the bank accounts of corrupt Iranian leaders and terrorists. The cash payment authorized by Obama is one of the most disgraceful and shameful, quote-unquote, negotiations in the history of our nation. It was a payment the Obama White House first denied, then ignored, and then grudgingly acknowledged, end quote. Patel continues, think about how our military felt about the Iran nuclear deal. The United States had been fighting a war on terrorism in the Middle East dating back to 2001. And President Barack Obama gave cash to our enemies and released prisoners back to them. I don't want to speculate, but this deal smells fishy, and I cannot imagine our military was okay with it. The Iran nuclear deal clearly put our national security at risk.
And it's still so funny that Biden was consistently trying. He campaigned on trying to get back into this deal, and he couldn't do it. Like, how was that possible?
The Benghazi attack. This is where things get interesting, because this is where we start to see some familiar faces from the Devolution series. First, let's look at some background that I have copied and pasted from Ballotpedia. I will leave all the citations for your reference. There's plenty more to this story, but again, for the sake of brevity, I will try only to cover the relevant details. First, on September 11th, 2012, Ambassador Stevens was in Benghazi, meeting with Libyan officials in search of Muammar Gaddafi's weapons stockpiles. He was also there to open a cultural center. The attack on the U.S. mission started around 9:40 p.m. when gunshots and an explosion were heard. The militia overpowered the main gate and burned the barracks building. At about 10 p.m., the militia broke through the compound wall, and the ambassador went to the safe room with information officer Sean Smith. The CIA annex, located approximately a mile away, was notified of the attack. While Stevens and Smith were in a safe room, the building was set on fire using diesel fuel, causing smoke to fill the building. The CIA agents and 16 Libyan security guards regained control of the compound and began searching for Stevens and Smith. The first drones were sent over the site as President Obama began to meet with the Secretary of Defense and the chair of the Joint Chiefs. An email indicating the group Ansar al-Sharia claimed the attack was sent from the U.S. State Department to the White House. At about 1:15 a.m. on September 12th, a rescue team from Tripoli arrived in Benghazi. Those rescued from the mission were at the CIA annex, including Stevens. Deputy Mission Chief Gregory Hicks notified Secretary of State Hillary Clinton that Americans in Benghazi needed to be evacuated at 2 a.m. At about 4 a.m., the militants attacked the CIA annex and killed Navy SEALs Glenn Doherty and Tyrone Woods. The bodies of Stevens, Smith, Doherty, and Woods were on the final plane out of Libya at 10 a.m. on September 12th. Although senior White House officials initially labeled the attack a spontaneous reaction to an anti-Muslim video made by an American that was circulating in the region, the Obama administration acknowledged on September 19th, 2012, that it was a premeditated terrorist attack. Then there is this article from Glenn Kessler of the Washington Post. There have been many questions raised about the development of the administration's talking points in the aftermath of the attack on Benghazi, Libya, that left 4 Americans dead, including the U.S. ambassador. There have been allegations that the administration deliberately covered up the fact that this was a terrorist attack. We have noted before in our extensive timeline of Benghazi statements how long it took the president to concede that point in the midst of his re-election campaign. But with the release of 12 versions of the talking points Friday by ABC News, perhaps there is an alternative explanation. This basically was a bureaucratic knife fight, pitting the State Department against the CIA. In other words, the final version of the talking points may have been so wan because officials simply deleted everything that upset the two sides, so they were left with nothing.
That's interesting to me that they're trying to say that the CIA and the State Department were pitted against each other, as if that's a thing. Like, they're the same. To me, they're the same, part of the same group. Like, they're allies in pretty much everything. We've seen that unfold, especially over the last 8 years. Maybe back then things were different, but I can't imagine it.
Let's examine the evidence for a bureaucratic explanation. First, some important context. Although the ambassador was killed, the Benghazi quote-unquote consulate was not a consulate at all, but basically a secret CIA operation which included an effort to round up shoulder-launched missiles. In fact, only 7 of the 30 Americans evacuated from Benghazi had any connection to the State Department. The rest were affiliated with the CIA. The official reports, such as the one from the Accountability Review Board and the Senate Homeland Security Committee report, essentially dance around that uncomfortable fact. Quote from the Accountability Review Board. In December 2011, the Undersecretary for Management approved a 1-year continuation of the U.S. special mission in Benghazi, which was never a consulate and never formally notified to the Libyan government. From the Senate report, quote, the attacks in Benghazi occurred at 2 different locations, a Department of State temporary mission facility and an annex facility approximately a mile away used by another agency of the United States government. So, from the State Department perspective, this was an attack on a CIA operation, perhaps by the very people the CIA was battling. And the ambassador, tragically, was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But for obvious reasons, the administration could not publicly admit that Benghazi was mostly a secret CIA effort. Talking points were originally developed by the CIA at the request of a member of the House Intelligence Committee. Interestingly, all of the versions are consistent on one point, that the attacks were, quote, spontaneously inspired by protests at the U.S. Embassy in Cairo, a fact later deemed to be incorrect. The talking points through Friday begin to become rather detailed, at which point there is sharp pushback from the State Department. Let's look at the version as of 5:09 p.m. on September 14th, Friday, and see the red flags for state. The talking points refer to a direct assault against the U.S. consulate. The CIA says it, quote, warned of social media reports calling for a demonstration in front of the embassy and that jihadists were threatening to break into the embassy. The CIA says it, quote, has produced numerous pieces on the threat of extremists in Benghazi and eastern Libya. It cites, quote, at least 5 other attacks against foreign interests and says it cannot rule out the individuals had previously surveilled the U.S. facilities. The clear implication is that state screwed up, even though internally it was known that this was a CIA operation. State.
See, there it is. Like, they knew it was CIA stuff and they allowed it to continue anyway. They were definitely working in this together.
Department spokeswoman Victoria Nuland.
Yeah, Bubba Ganoush in the chat says that's why the CIA didn't want the military to intervene and save the ambassador. We weren't supposed to be there.
Especially objects to the reference to previous warnings, saying it, quote, could be abused by members of Congress to beat up the State Department for not paying attention to warnings, end quote. Moreover, Nuland had been constrained from saying much about the attack at her daily press briefings, so she was unsure why the agency would suddenly give so much information to members of Congress. After the CIA makes minor changes, such as deleting a reference to the militant group Ansar al-Sharia, Nuland responds, quote, these changes don't resolve all of my issues or those of my building's leadership, end quote. At that point, a White House official weighs in and writes in an email, quote, we must make sure that the talking points reflect all agency equities, including those of the State Department, and we don't want to undermine the FBI investigation. We thus will work through the talking points tomorrow morning at the Deputies Committee meeting.
I'm assuming that's the NSC Deputies Committee meeting.
Quote. Update. CNN says it obtained an actual copy of this email, and it differs from how it was previously reported, particularly because there was no specific mention of the State Department. Quote, we need to resolve this in a way that respects all of the relevant equities, particularly the investigation. We can take this up tomorrow morning at the deputies, end quote. The final version of the talking points shows what happened. Just about everything was cut, leaving virtually nothing. The reference to consulate was also deleted, replaced by diplomatic post. From a bureaucratic perspective, it may have seemed like the best possible solution at the time. From a political perspective, it turned out to be a disaster. For reasons unknown, the White House sent UN Ambassador Susan E. Rice on 5 Sunday shows with those talking points. And the rest is history.
I know this is a lot of context, especially on Benghazi here, but there's a reason for this because it ties to both Flynn and Chris Miller.
The talking points were so weak that Rice immediately raised suspicions that the administration was hiding something important. She instantly earned Pinocchio's. She also repeatedly referenced the supposed impact of an anti-Islam video, which was never part of talking points. Further investigation may make the bureaucratic explanation moot. But in Washington, one should never underestimate the importance of internal conflict between agencies. Patel continues. The administration could not publicly admit that Benghazi was mostly a secret CIA effort. Internal conflict between agencies. Will we ever know the true scope of what happened during Benghazi? Maybe not. There's definitely more to the story. However, I now want to discuss how this relates to the theme of the article, that our corrupt political establishment and their actions are at odds with the military and their duty to uphold the security and independence of the United States. This is where we see ties between Benghazi and devolution. Let's once again look into the background of the man at the epicenter of the Devolution series, Christopher C. Miller. Some relevant background. Christopher Miller. Quote, but those who know the former Army Special Forces officer and have worked with him describe him as a standout leader who has, at every level of his career, kept perspective on the national impacts of his work and overarching defense strategy. As a company commander with 5th Special Forces Group, Miller helped to direct the first covert invasion of Afghanistan following the September 11, 2001 terror attacks. A small number of Green Berets from 5th Group, some of them on horseback, were sent to defeat the Taliban in an operation depicted years later in the feature film 12 Strong. According to Jason Amarine, a former member of the unit, Miller was in no small part responsible for the way that first deployment took place. Amarine says Chris basically got 5th Group into the war. He said, now a future of war fellow at the New America think tank, told military.com, quote, in 2001, as we prepared for Afghanistan, there really was no coherent plan initially, and big disagreements between special operations, CIA, and the White House. Basically, Chris Miller volunteered 5th Group to become the Joint Special Operations Task Force, to become JSOTF North, and spearhead the invasion of Afghanistan. Important to note that as far back as 2001, our military was at odds with the political establishment. The subject matter of these types of disagreements are what negatively affect our national security. The article continues. At the time, Amarine was a captain in a Special Forces A team, ODA-574. Miller, a 35-year-old major, was part of a B team, a headquarters element. But on December 5th, 2001, after an infamous B-52 bomber friendly fire airstrike that left 3 American soldiers and 10 Afghan troops dead inside Amakale in Afghanistan's Oruzgan province, it was Miller's team that came in as a quick reaction force to support Amarine's devastated forces. Amarine described Miller as a man universally admired in the Special Forces world of prima donnas, end quote. Patel continues. This is an interesting story and something that I want you to keep in mind as I continue. Miller and his team came in as a quick reaction force in response to a friendly fire airstrike. A quick reaction force, QRF, is, quote, an armed military unit capable of rapidly responding to developing situations, typically to assist allied units in need of such assistance. They are to have equipment ready to respond to any type of emergency, typically within 10 minutes or less. That is based on Unit Standard Operating Procedures, SOPs. Here's another example from 2003 discussing the QRF team, Quick Response Force, QRF team, from the recently abandoned Bagram Air Force Base in Afghanistan. 10th Mountain Division soldiers provide quick reaction force by Sergeant Greg Heath, USA Special to American Forces Press Service, Bagram, Afghanistan, October 17th, 2003. Like firemen on duty at a firehouse, 10th Mountain Division infantry soldiers who make up Bagram's quick reaction force sit in their hut near the airfield, always ready to extinguish any problems coalition forces may have in the area. Inside the modest hut are wall-to-wall bunks stacked 3 high and a living area for the soldiers of Company C, 2nd Battalion, 87th Infantry Regiment, whose platoons perform 24 hours QRF duty on a rotational basis. The QRF soldiers are prepared for a wide variety of combat-related missions. And if Bagram or coalition soldiers were ever attacked, the QRF soldiers could gather their gear and be on a CH-47 Chinook helicopter ready to be flown into action in a very short period of time, according to 3rd Platoon Leader, 1st Lieutenant Stephen Helm. "We can be called on for anything," said Team Leader Corporal Sean Hurst, 3rd Platoon. "We're ready all the time for anything imaginable that could happen." Back to Chris Miller. Quote, "Miller would ultimately become the commander of 2nd Battalion, 5th Special Forces Group, having been part of the 2003 Iraq invasion and completed multiple additional deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. According to documents made public ahead of his confirmation to lead the National Counterterrorism Center, Miller also spent 3 years of his Army career detailed from the Department of Defense to the intelligence community. Following his 2014 retirement from the Army, he went to the Pentagon, working for 2 years as a contracted special operations consultant to the Undersecretaries of Defense for Intelligence and Policy. Then, from March 2018 to December 2019, he joined the National Security Council at the White House, serving as Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Counterterrorism and Transnational Threats. On January 6th, 2020, Miller became the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Combating Terrorism, a position he'd hold until his confirmation as NCTC Director on August 10th this year. Miller also spent 3 years of his Army career detailed from the DoD to the intelligence community. More specifically, starting sometime in 2011 through sometime in 2014, Chris Miller was in his last assignment as an Army officer as Director for Special Operations and Irregular Warfare in the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations / Low Intensity Conflict and Interdependent Capabilities at the Pentagon. For those of you who don't know, we're back to Patel at this point. As the Director for Special Operations and IW in the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations / Low Intensity Conflict, he would be the 3rd highest in command, specifically for Special Operations at the DoD, directly reporting to the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Counterterrorism, who directly reported to the ASD SO/LIC. This is a position located in the Pentagon. Here is a slideshow from July 2014, prepared by then Colonel Christopher Miller, showing the somewhat confusing org chart. I've simplified it for you to illustrate the chain of command during his time as Director for SO/IW. All right, here we are. Secretary of Defense, ASD for SO/LIC, and then under that, Partnership Strat, Stability Ops, Special Ops and Counterterrorism under that, Counter Narcotics and Global Threats, and then he reports directly to Special Ops and Counterterrorism, Christopher Miller, Director of Special Ops and Irregular Warfare, IW. During the Benghazi raid on September 11th, 2012, Chris Miller was watching the events unfold from the Pentagon and was part of the team that would have been making operational decisions. In other words, he was present and directly involved when special operations were halted from responding to Benghazi attacks. Quote, hours later, according to excerpts of the account by the U.S. diplomat Gregory Hicks, American officials in the Libyan capital sought permission to deploy 4 U.S. Special Operations troops to Benghazi aboard a Libyan military aircraft early the next morning. The troops were told to stand down. Jason Chaffetz, Republican representative from Utah, said, "The White House and the Pentagon have allowed us to believe that there were no military options on the table. The motto of the military is to leave no person behind, and it's stunning and unacceptable to think we had military willing and ready to go, and the Pentagon told them to stand down." That's just not the American. Back to Patel. There were special operations, quick reaction forces with ability to get to Benghazi, but they were ordered to stand down by the Pentagon. Who at the Pentagon ordered the stand down? The Benghazi incident led to multiple congressional investigations as described by Ballotpedia.
I'm going to skip through some of this long, text and get to some of my comments on it. So this is the next part, skipping just the Senate investigations, which Mike Pompeo was a part of.
Back to Patel. So, while I don't think we have the full scope of the Benghazi situation, here is what we do know. Chris Miller was in the Pentagon when the Special Operations QRF was told to stand down. Remember, these are people he personally worked with before being promoted to the Pentagon. How do you think he felt about that? Chris Miller was a member of one of those QRF teams back in 2001 at the start of the war. I can't imagine the same man who volunteered his team to be a QRF for the 2001 mission referenced above would be at all okay with the Pentagon's response, or lack thereof, to the Benghazi incident. The political establishment was using the military to advance their political agendas. They created a bureaucratic chain of command in which operational decisions were made through the Pentagon. I don't think this sat well with Chris Miller, and I believe I can prove it. Here are Chris Miller's comments from November 18th, 2020, when he, along with Ezra Cohen Watnick, announced the elevation of United States special operations to a level on par with that of the other branches of the armed services.
And this is such a big moment. We've referenced this so many times on the Devolution Power Hour and everything. This cutting of the red tape is really what enables something like Devolution to unfold. So this is huge. And I think in part 22, I wrote about this speech and where they gave it and the statue of Bruce and everything. Like this, it's such an interesting, the whole thing is fascinating.
Chris Miller's statement, November 18th, 2020, quote, "Good morning, everyone. Wow, what a week. That old cliche, if you want a friend in Washington, D.C., get a dog, may be true for many. But for me, I know I can come to Fort Bragg and be with my brothers and sisters in Special Operations Forces who will always have my back. It is an honor to be here on this hallowed plaza, where we are reminded of the enormous sacrifices and burdens shouldered by our nation's special operators. These brave heroes were first to the enemy's doorstep. Mark, in the aftermath of the September 11th attacks in 2001, only weeks after that dark day in our nation's history, they plunged into danger to bring justice to the terrorists who took thousands of innocent American lives, and they will be the ones who continue to deny safe haven to violent extremists and maintain unrelenting pressure on the road to stability and lasting peace in Afghanistan and Iraq. I know firsthand the caliber and character of these brave service members having served as an Army Special Forces Company commander under then Colonel John Mulholland during Operation Enduring Freedom, and with Mark, of course. I also served 2 tours in Iraq, including during the 2003 invasion and later in 2006 as a Special Forces Battalion commander, 2nd Battalion, the Special Forces Group. Absolutely the best Special Forces battalions in the history of the world, no offense. I spent the remainder of my career just as committed to defeating terrorists and those that would help harbor them. Yesterday, the president ordered the downsizing of our force presence in Afghanistan and Iraq, 2,500 troops in each country by 15 January 2021, in a manner that protects our fighting men and women and our hard-earned gains. At the same time, you all know this, should any malign actors underestimate our resolve or attempt to undermine our efforts, we will not hesitate to restore deterrence and defeat any and all threats. As we implement the president's orders..."
This is an interesting thing here because this is something we did see unfold under Biden with the Abbey Gate stuff, their withdrawal that was set in motion by Trump. Like I shouldn't say that. The initial, move to downsize the force presence there was set in place by Trump, like that plan. It was obviously not executed very well by the Biden administration. There were things that went down that were just wild. But I remember back to originally when this was going down and Trump and their team were talking about this plan. They had to have 0 forces left. But then shortly after what went down at Abbey Gate, Chris Miller came out and in an interview or an article, they talked about like, well, yeah, we were going to withdraw, but we were going to leave a presence there. That wasn't actually widely known until shortly after. Even though he says in the speech, nobody was really talking about that. Remember, that was kind of a big deal.
We also recognize that transitions and campaigns are fraught with risk and unexpected challenges and opportunities. That is why I'm here today to announce this. This is an omen. I'm here today to announce that I directed the Special Operations civilian leadership to report directly to me instead of through the current bureaucratic channels. This historic step finalizes what Congress has authorized and directed and will put Special Operations Command on par with the military services for the first time. This reform will immediately improve agility to the department and the command and will enable us to streamline information flow, enhance decision-making, and more adaptively and adeptly support our commanders and their superb soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. Change is often tectonic in the Department of Defense. This is by design, and as our history shows, has served the nation very well. Today's reforms are directly aligned with all three of my priorities, as outlined in my message to the force on Monday. First, bring the current war to an end in a responsible manner that guarantees the security of our citizens. Two, continue implementing the National Defense Strategy with an emphasis on transforming the department for great.
I'm going to fast forward a couple here.
For our special or competition. I can think of no better place than here, at the original home of our Special Operations Forces, to enshrine stronger support for the next generation of special operators, hardened by combat and unrelenting deployments, who understand the fundamental nature of war, who remain committed to defeating every threat, and who are undeterred by the high price of victory. Back to Patel. This reform will immediately improve agility to the department and the command, and will enable us to streamline information flow, enhance decision-making, and more adaptively and adeptly support our commanders and their superb soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. This almost feels like a direct shot at the Obama administration and their handling of Benghazi.
It also feels very devolution-y.
Chris Miller and the Special Operations Forces account for just one aspect of the Benghazi incident. General Michael Flynn accounts for the other. I'll try to summarize this as best I can.
I'm going to skip ahead a little bit again to the end of the section because everybody's familiar with Michael Flynn, but I'm going to get to my parts of it where I'm writing it, not just like Patrick reading articles.
Hillary Clinton's prosecution of foreign policy in Libya crossed several lines. She showed extremely bad judgment by ignoring military and intelligence officials. She let personal interests conflict with U.S. foreign policy, and most importantly, she may have broken the law. Again, back to Patel. By ignoring military and intelligence officials, she let personal interests conflict with U.S. foreign policy. Michael Flynn is perfectly describing the war between white hats in the military and the corrupt political establishment. Flynn was one of those intelligence officials ignored by Hillary Clinton due to her own personal interests. The above article was written using no classified information. Imagine what else Flynn knew from his time as director of the DIA, with access to the highest level of classified information within our military. Michael Flynn represented the biggest threat to the political establishment. This was the reason Obama told Trump not to hire Michael Flynn, which naturally Trump ignored. Quote from New York Times Magazine. Obama reportedly told Trump that Flynn was not fit for a high-level role in his administration at a November 10th meeting in the Oval Office. Flynn, who was an early Trump backer, had been fired as Obama's Defense Intelligence Agency head in 2014. Despite that history with Flynn, Trump reportedly thought Obama was joking when he told him not to bring Flynn into the White House. From John Harwood. More. Source tells Kay Welker NBC that Trump thought Obama was ribbing him by advising against hiring Flynn. Back to Patel. Of course, Trump knew he wasn't joking. Michael Flynn was exactly who Trump wanted and needed to help take down the political establishment once and for all. Trump knew it, and so did the political establishment. This leads us to the last scandal I'll be touching on from the Obama administration. Spygate. When Donald Trump won the 2016 election, the Obama administration, along with the entire political establishment, was shocked and in a panic. Their criminal enterprise was at risk of exposure. General Michael Flynn was their worst nightmare. They desperately needed Flynn out of the picture, so they turned to who they always turn to: the mainstream media, big tech, and the intelligence community. Those three groups colluded to create the false story that Flynn was a Russian agent. They framed Flynn to get him kicked from Trump's cabinet, and then they used that as a springboard to move forward with their fake Russia investigation. At the time, it was considered by many to be the greatest political crime in American history. In my opinion, it has only been surpassed by the theft of the 2020 election. On a broader scale, however, the election theft was perpetrated to cover up for the Russia hoax, along with the rest of their crimes. So maybe we can consider this whole series of events as one long, continuous political crime. The silent war.
I stand by that. I mean, all of this stuff is connected. The reason they stole the election was because of everything that's compounded from before it.
Brian Cates is second to none when it comes to all things Spygate. It was one of his articles that first got me interested in politics. I urge you to read all of his work, but here is his latest piece, which I believe provides an excellent reminder as to what is coming. A quote from Brian.
I'm going to skip ahead again a little bit.
Back to Patel. This scandal is enormous, and yes, Durham is coming. It looks like Durham's report is being set up to drop around the same time as the Arizona forensic audit will be released. Those two reports will have earth-shattering consequences and will expose the biggest series of political crimes in our history. The Durham report will expose the corruption and scandals, and the audit report will expose the theft of an election and their cover-up. This brings us to the final.
I will say the Durham report did come out a little deflating. I don't think we've seen the end of it. And then also on top of that, the Arizona audit, I was wrong about that too. But I stand by like those two things. The election thing is the most important thing to me. I think exposing our election fraud, I've said this a million times, so this isn't anything new. Right behind that is the corruption of those people stealing elections. Like those two things do go hand in hand. So, and at the time of writing this, it did seem like they were kind of being set to drop around the same time, but didn't happen that way.
Final piece of the deep state puzzle. The political establishment loves to use the phrase systemic racism in an attempt to pin all of America's problems under a label that serves only to cause more division and hide the causes of the actual problems. The reality is that the far bigger systemic problem in our country is that of systemic political corruption. Joe Biden is the byproduct of the systemic political corruption created and carried out by the political establishment. Biden is a lifetime government talking head who never actually accomplished anything noteworthy in terms of policy while in Congress, but became wildly successful selling his name and political clout for personal profit. Leading up to the 2020 election, it was discovered that Hunter Biden's laptop appeared to be abandoned at a computer repair store and supposedly had copious amounts of information detailing the corrupt business dealings of the Biden family. In order to protect Joe Biden's election chances, the propaganda wing of the political establishment buried and censored anybody who dared to cover it, calling it Russian disinformation. The reality is much different. From Business Insider, quote.
We're all very familiar with this. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to my points on it.
Back to Patel. The intelligence community, mainstream media, and big tech have done everything they can. To provide cover for the Biden family in regards to what is on this laptop, we have to keep in mind who else might have had this information. Specifically, who else could have the laptop and be able to act upon what is inside? The answer is simple. It's the same people who have been fighting the political establishment for years, the same people with terabytes of data from Chinese defector Dong Jingwei, the same people who know COVID was a bioweapon, the same people who caught the political establishment stealing an election with help from a foreign adversary, the same people who are running the devolution operation. President Donald Trump and the military. The Biden crime family. Biden's entire presidency has been an abject failure. The most relevant failure is the situation in Afghanistan because we are watching it play out live. There wasn't a death under President Trump's watch since February of 2020. Trump's policy in the Middle East was working. How did Joe Biden mess this up so badly? Did Trump play a role? Are Biden's decisions being made based on what's best for America or what is best for his bank account? Let's find out.
So I'm going to skip through a lot of this part as well and get to the recap of this section. And if you guys are wondering why I'm speeding through this, if I play this all the way through, I probably wouldn't get to the grocery store and then pick up my kids on time from school. So I forgot how long this article was. Otherwise, I would have started sooner. But here we're skipping ahead to the recap of this section.
Recap. BHR was formed when Bohai Capital, a Chinese government-linked firm, merged with Rosemont Seneca Partners, a company formed by Hunter Biden and Chris Hines, John Kerry's stepson. Hunter Biden currently has a 10% stake in BHR.
If you guys recall, too, this is one of the things I wrote a little bit later, that executive order that Trump wrote. I think he initially wrote it in November, and it said that anybody with investments in companies that have ties to the CCP and their military or whatever, Chinese military companies, CMC companies, that you were not allowed to purchase any more of it. Later on in January, before leaving office, he amended that executive order with a new one and said that anybody who had those same investments have to divest from those companies. Later on, when Biden was in there, I think it was like June of the following year of 2021, Biden reverted back to the original executive order where it just said you couldn't purchase, but you didn't have to divest. And so because of that, Hunter Biden was allowed to keep and maintain this 10% stake in BHR. And BHR, as you're about to see here in this recap part, is one of those companies that is the world's largest maker of electric vehicle batteries. Kind of makes sense why they did this Green New Deal. Elon Musk and Tesla has a contract with them.
CATL is one of the companies in BHR's portfolio. CATL is the world's largest maker of electric vehicle batteries. So, how does this relate to Afghanistan? This August 28th, 2021 article from Forbes provides us with the answer.
This is going to be interesting. I'm not going to skip this part because I think there's something here that I may not have talked about previously.
Quote, China is already eyeing up Afghanistan's vast mineral wealth, using the excuse of wanting to help rebuild the war-torn country, now primarily ruled by the Taliban. In fact, the Americans hadn't even left Afghanistan before China's diplomats showed up to quote-unquote help, states a recent report from U.S. global investors. The report explains as follows, quote, mere hours after the Taliban completed its swift takeover of Afghanistan, a Chinese foreign ministry spokesperson said that Beijing was ready to participate in Afghanistan's reconstruction and development. Who can blame China? There's a lot of money to be made. Quote, the combined value of Afghanistan's minerals is estimated at between $1 to $3 trillion. By comparison, opium poppy production in the country was valued at only $350 million in 2020, the report states. Put another way, The mineral resources under the ground in Afghanistan could be worth almost 10 times the country's infamous opium crop. These minerals include lithium, gold, silver, platinum, iron, copper, aluminum, and uranium. Among those, lithium stands out as a real prize because it has become essential to the manufacture of the lithium-ion batteries used in electric vehicles. Better still for China, if it gets its way, is that Afghanistan is set to be the Saudi Arabia of Afghanistan. In other words, the Central Asian country is reputedly home to heaps of lithium. As the largest car market in the world and the global move to EVs, China will likely want to secure every last pound of lithium that it can. End quote. You read that correctly. Before the dust even settled over Afghanistan from Biden's botched withdrawal, China was already in talks with the Taliban attempting to get their hands on those rare earth elements.
And this is the part, or he's about to read, which I think is pretty interesting, considering how my mindset has evolved with the sovereign alliance stuff. At the time of writing this article, I was not convinced yet that China and Xi, at least, good twin, evil twin, whatever, the good twin from China could be working with Trump to take down the deep state and Putin and all that stuff. I know I'm familiar with the Q drop. I've seen it a million times. When I used to argue against like that logically. Now, logically, it makes much more sense. We've seen a lot more things play out on the world stage, publicly, narratively, everything that make me believe this could be possible and probably is possible. The Doha agreement with the Taliban that Trump put in place is also pretty dastardly. Like there's no deaths in the last 20 months of Trump's administration. When we pull out of China, the Taliban take over and get all of these weapons, which is exactly what you would need to give them in part of a deal where they were the ones maintaining security in the Middle East. Now, I'm not saying the Taliban is good people, but we've talked about this a million times too. But looking at this again, with the thought process of China potentially being part of the sovereign alliance, it's more interesting knowing that China, immediately after this withdrawal, talks to the Taliban and wants to get their hands on the rare earth elements. Like, is this a sovereign alliance play right here?
From CNBC, China poised for bigger role in Afghanistan? Only hours after the Taliban overran Afghanistan, a foreign ministry spokeswoman said Beijing was ready for friendly cooperation with Afghanistan. On the basis of fully respecting the sovereignty of Afghanistan and the will of all factions in the country, China has maintained contact and communication with the Afghan Taliban and played a constructive role in promoting the political settlement of the Afghan issue, said spokeswoman Hua Chunying at a press conference on Monday. According to Hua, the Taliban said on multiple occasions that it looks forward to China's participation in Afghanistan's reconstruction and development. We are ready to continue to develop good neighborliness and friendly cooperation with Afghanistan and play a constructive role in Afghanistan's peace and reconstruction, Hua said. Back to Patel. The Biden family is set to personally benefit from China gaining access to Afghanistan's rare earth elements. And I think the timeline can serve as circumstantial evidence. On July 6th, 2021, an article was published in the AP titled, U.S. left Afghanistan airfield at night, didn't tell the new commander, from the AP. Keep the title of the article in mind. The U.S. left Afghanistan without telling the Afghan commander.
Do you think the Taliban knew? That's the question. But I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit again to the end of this section, talking about Trump and Miller and what they said about leaving Afghanistan here.
Always felt it was a huge.
This is Chris Miller and his quote.
Strategic error by expanding the war. I thought the war was for special operations, small footprint, he said at the time. By then, Miller knew that some in the U.S. intelligence community believed the war could become smaller once again and sustainable. We did plenty of war games on this, and we knew that the minimal force structure was, he said this week, the number was 800. If this all goes bad, what is the minimal force structure needed to maintain counterterrorism, strike, and reconnaissance capability? We can do it for 800, 850. Defense One was able to confirm Miller's account of the 800 personnel study independently with another former NSC staff member. Miller said he understood Trump's May 1 withdrawal deal to be a negotiating tactic.
Trump is always negotiating, just like Chris Paul says.
Back to Patel. How much do you think Trump knows in regards to Biden's corruption relating to China? I'm just a regular guy using publicly available information, and I've pieced together a direct connection between Biden's corruption with China and the current Afghanistan situation. Imagine what Trump and the most technologically advanced military in the world can piece together. They know absolutely everything. Remember to think bigger. Trump is always operating 10 steps ahead, and Trump knew that if Biden was president, China would put pressure on him to leave Afghanistan. It's obvious how much financial benefit was in play for both the CCP and the Biden family fortune. Unfettered access to the Afghanistan rare earth elements, one of the most lucrative markets in the world, can officially be added to the list of reasons the CCP aided Biden in stealing the election. By publicly saying he wanted all troops to withdraw and privately intending the opposite, he provided Biden with a window of opportunity, maybe better described as a security blanket of an excuse for his rapid and total withdrawal. Even
this whole thing is just much more fascinating to me. I'm trying to think of this in a new light with China being part of the sovereign alliance stuff, and China, the known corruption between China and the Biden family. Like, is that a evil twin thing, or is it a good twin thing helping to create a narrative for Trump? I mean, that's something I hope we get more details on in the long term. But I'm gonna skip ahead here again one more time to my conclusion of kind of this section where I sum up some of the stuff about Trump setting some narrative traps and whatnot.
Why hasn't Biden sent in more troops to facilitate a safer withdrawal? Why is he abandoning Americans there? The only logical explanation is that somebody is forcing him to do it this way. I'm guessing that somebody is the CCP, and I think Donald Trump and those running the devolution operation are forcing his hand. Remember the story from above, that Bagram Air Force Base was abandoned in the middle of the night without telling the Afghan commander? Why wouldn't they tell him? Bear in mind that it was Trump who signed a deal with the Taliban, and it is Biden and the political establishment who are backing the corrupt Afghan government. Article from August 16th, NPR. The fall of the US-backed government in Afghanistan to the Taliban happened faster than almost anyone in Washington or Kabul could have imagined. As of Sunday afternoon, Afghan President Ashraf Ghani had fled his nation. The Taliban were on the verge of once again running the country, and President Biden authorized sending in thousands of additional troops to try and safely extract US diplomatic personnel and others out of Kabul. End quote.
This is a devolution proof, guys. Like the fact that Trump had that deal in place with the Taliban and they end up in control after we pull out of there, even though the Biden administration was backing the other guys. That's a devolution proof. That's something unfolding. It's Trump's policies from when he was president playing out while Biden's president. Stuff like that is devolution proof. That's a contradiction. And that's while Biden was trying to get back into the Iran nuclear deal.
If Joe Biden and the United States were supposedly backing the Afghan government, why didn't we tell them we were leaving Bagram? The withdrawal has allowed the Taliban to swiftly take over nearly the entire country, the same Taliban Trump made a deal with. I don't want to speculate, but I can assure you there is more to the Afghanistan story than what we're being led to believe. And believe Trump set the table for things to happen this way. Biden had the opportunity to handle things the right way, but instead, he completely botched it. While I can't tell you exactly how this is going to play out, I believe things are unfolding as Trump suspected they would. He prepared for and expected things to play out this way because Trump prepares for all possibilities. His goading of Biden alone tells me that this is how he wanted it to happen. The political establishment has come to the end of the road.
I like what you said there, RT Joan. Like you said, it had to happen this way, and Trump is a master marionette. I've never been a big believer in the Patriots are in full control, like the full control. We're watching a movie thing. We've talked about this, the morality of it. I don't think they could or should be responsible for bad things to happen just for the awakening. But you can put things in place to prevent certain things from happening and allow the bad guys to do the bad things because that's their choice. That's different, right? But he can still be in full control in a narrative sense in that situation, if that makes sense. But yeah, I mean, the way he played this situation, the way he's everything. He's full control without having full direct control.
Trump and the military are playing them like fiddles at every turn. The final chapter of the political establishment has culminated with Joe Biden as a fake president, red-pilling America with his every move.
That stands true.
Are rapidly approaching the climax of this war.
Man, this was back in 2021, and it felt like we were approaching a climax, and we weren't even close.
We are on the precipice of a new era in American history.
I do believe that's true.
An era inspired by the principles our founding fathers had hoped and fought and died for. In a 2020 speech, Trump said, "To grow up in America is to live in a land where anything is possible, where anyone can rise, where any dream can come true, all because of the immortal principles our nation's founders inscribed nearly 2.5 centuries ago." We are here today to declare that we will never submit to tyranny. We will reclaim our history and our country for citizens of every race, color, religion, and creed. America's founding set in motion the unstoppable chain of events that abolished slavery, secured civil rights, defeated communism and fascism, and built the most fair, equal, and prosperous nation in human history. We will save this cherished inheritance for our children, for their children, and for every generation to come. When President Trump says this, he truly means it. The best is yet to come.
All right. A couple things here. So a comment from RHOJE in the chat that would explain why Kamala Demon was so pissed about Trump and the Taliban deal. What is interesting about the current administration and like how they are publicly the administration in charge, they're taking the full brunt of the blame for all the bad things going on, but they are constantly trying to blame Trump and what Trump did. And while they could just be trying to like pass off blame because that's what they do, they never can take responsibility for things, but also that could actually be true in the sense that it is kind of Trump's fault that these things are happening to them and they can't stop it. So the stuff like that is pretty darn interesting to watch it play out because it keeps happening over and over and over with the border, with the Afghanistan stuff, with the economy, with all these things. Technically, it's true. Economically, we're kind of in the situation. Granted, COVID happened, but because of COVID, Trump signed the economic bills to allow our printing of money, and here we are. Inflation, things bad, Doha agreement in Afghanistan. I mean, one after another, these things keep happening where technically Trump is responsible, but because he's out of office, he doesn't have to take any of the blame. And it red pills people on his behalf. It's brilliant. But yeah, this article, super long. I know. Very long. I get it. It's even tough for me to sometimes sit through some of that stuff. I can't believe I wrote that. But a lot of it, granted, is taking articles that somebody else wrote and providing context. But it's still a great article for context of why we are here. And a lot of that for me, I put it into an article because it was a learning experience. It was stuff that I wasn't really familiar with at the time. My next article, part 11, is also pretty long. Like they kind of stay long from here on out. Probably not quite as long as that article that I just did there, but um, the next one's pretty long as well. It's the CrowdStrike one, and the CrowdStrike one is an important one and very relevant to what we saw play out in 2020 and what we continue to see playing out and looking ahead to 2024. Especially because of one of the more recent articles I did, the illusion of democracy. That ties in. I mean, CrowdStrike is intimately involved in our elections and scandals, and they're a deep state tool. But we're going to do that probably next Tuesday. So we'll do next Tuesday, 11. Part 12 will probably be next Thursday. And that's all about the Color Revolution playbook and everything, also very relevant. And then the following week, maybe even the following Sunday. I don't know exactly when I'm going to do, but it'll probably be, I'm probably going to start doing a Tuesday, Thursday thing. And that will be part 13, which is one of my favorites and one of the most relevant articles we got because it talks about Executive Order 13961. One question I want to ask you guys is I'm debating, like I'm trying to stream more now that my kids are in school because I have a little bit more ability to do so. The summer was rough. I didn't get to do it that much. But now that my kids are in school, I can kind of do some more consistent streaming. And I'm curious if you guys would like to, if you would like me to do like some sort of, show, probably by myself, more often during the week. And it would be probably on more current event stuff, news stuff, just talking. I don't know. But if you guys have any ideas, I'm open to it. I'm considering it. We shall see. I'm not going to commit to anything yet, but if you're interested, let me know. Let me know on Telegram, Twitter, whatever. If you have any ideas, yeah, we'll see. But anyway, thanks for tuning in, everybody. Hit that thumbs up and keep coming back for more. The articles only get more interesting as we go here. So 11 CrowdStrike Tuesday. Thursday next week will be the playbook one, and the following week we'll get into Executive Order 13961. So thank you all, and we'll see you tomorrow on the Liberty Den. I'm also doing an interview tomorrow. I'm not sure if it's actually live or not, but I'll let you guys know. I'll either get you the link for the live one or the recording. So just make sure you're paying attention to socials. Hit that follow button. See you, everybody.